What is in the MOU is an increase to the industrial carbon tax. What is in the MOU is forcing a project proponent to partner up with this thing called Pathways, which is a massive
this is something that Premier Smith has agreed to. This is something that Premier Smith has signed on to and agreed to.
But when the government of Canada puts a take it or leave it type of deal that's not optimal, what we're offering the people of Alberta is the ability to get a pipeline built without a higher industrial carbon tax.
We have our man Andrew Scheer, who's one of the funniest guys on Parliament Hill. Scott Davis is a close second. Let's take a peek. He's here with Mike Couture. Power play. I don't know about that. Let's take a peek.
All of this, the Conservatives are calling for a federal tax holiday on fuel for the rest of 2026. Now, if the feds were to adopt the plan, it would cost the government more than $5 billion. Here's Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre.
I'm calling on the government to suspend all fuel taxes for the rest of the year. A policy that would save 25 cents a liter, about $20 a fill-up, and $1,200 for the average family of four between now and the end of the year. The problem is that the government is too rich and the people are too poor. It's time to have the government pinch its pennies so that Canadians don't have to.
In an interview that's set to air on CTV's Question Period this Sunday, Government House Leader Steve McKinnon was asked if the feds are considering such a move.
We are obviously very sensitive to the high price of energy caused by this war in Iran. And these are entirely
McKinnon is a bum.
External factors, nothing to do with the fundamentals of Canada. It's an interesting idea that I heard from Mr. Poilievre, but I haven't been part of any discussion about removing the gas tax.
Joining me now to talk more about this Conservative idea is their House Leader, Andrew Scheer.
Let's go.
Mr. Scheer, welcome back to Power Play. Thanks for being here.
He's right.
Always great to be on your show, Mike.
So I wanted to start off with your party's proposal to cut the gas tax, something that consumers would likely welcome, but there are some big implications to that. It would cost the federal government, by estimates of Mr. Poilievre, $5.25 billion in tax revenue. Do you not want to use that money to pay down a deficit that your party has continually criticized for years?
Well, there's lots of areas that the Liberal government wastes money on. And just to put this in perspective, we're calling for a complete elimination of federal taxes on fuel, on gasoline and diesel, starting with the federal excise tax, about 10 cents a liter on gas, the GST, of course, and the fuel standards tax, which the Liberals and Mark Carney is committed to, adding 7 cents a liter right now, rising to 17 cents a liter. This increases the costs of literally everything that has to be transported, groceries, goods, you name it. There's lots of areas where the government is wasting money on. For example, we announced that the Conservatives would oppose the Liberal ALTO boondoggle. That's $90 billion. So we could pay for the elimination of federal gas taxes for 15 years just by not proceeding with this $90 billion ALTO boondoggle.
He calls it a boondoggle.
In addition, we've identified areas of waste on consultants, on phony and bogus foreign aid programs that provide no results for Canadians. So there's lots and lots of areas that we've identified that we could offset the revenue. But most importantly, this is about providing relief for consumers, relief for Canadians who are just getting walloped by high
walloped. Andrew Scheer is funny.
Fuel prices.
I take your point, and certainly I want to address ALTO in just a moment here, but I continue to come back to that issue of your party has criticized this government for years now, that they've run a deficit to the heights that it hasn't been since COVID-19 spending, $72 billion right now. Is it fiscally responsible to cut off that source of revenue that's coming in from the gas tax that could be used to pay down that deficit?
Well, you know, first of all, it's important to point out that the Liberals are not paying down that deficit. The Liberals are not doing anything under Mark Carney that even approaches fiscal responsibility. Mark Carney's actually made those deficits worse.
But in fairness, what you're advocating is to cut off $5.25 billion worth of revenue that could go to service that deficit.
Well, we believe we can do both provide tax relief and work back towards a balanced budget. That's why Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have a dollar for dollar rule, where before we announce any policy that would cost the Treasury or deprive the Treasury of revenue, we come up with the savings. And today in the announcement, Pierre outlined a number of areas where we believe we can absolutely offset the revenue that comes in from gas taxes. ALTO, consultants, foreign aid, those are just a few of the types of things that we can help provide relief for Canadians by eliminating that kind of wasteful spending. And I would also put it to you kind of the other way, should the federal government get a massive windfall in tax revenue because of global factors that are affecting the price at the pump? Should the GST, for example, is a percentage of the price at the pump. So as the cost per liter goes up, the government gets a massive windfall. And we don't believe that consumers should have to bankroll, motorists should have to bankroll that kind of windfall for the federal government. This could be much better off for the Canadian economy, much better off for consumers' bottom line, for families who are struggling to fuel up their car to take their children to activities, the cost of groceries going up as trucking costs get more expensive. Providing that relief actually leaves that money in the economy is better off, not just for the economy as a whole, but for individuals and for families that are struggling with high fuel prices.
So I'll use your logic there. Two Conservative premiers, Danielle Smith of Alberta, Scott Moe of Saskatchewan. They said that they're not going to be cutting their provincial gas taxes because they both said there are other ways that they could provide relief with the money they're actually taking in. So why do you continue to suggest a tax cut if those provincial Conservative premiers are not suggesting that? They seem more than happy to take the money in.
Well, I'll let provincial premiers be accountable to their voters and to their legislatures. We're here to hold the federal government to account. And this Liberal government has spent 10 years trying to make driving more expensive. It has been a goal of the Liberal ideology to make fuel more expensive, to make it harder to buy gas and diesel cars and trucks. It is a desired outcome for the Liberal government to make driving harder and more expensive.
So just to interrupt for a moment, are you saying that Scott Moe, are you saying the Premier of the province that you're in right now is trying to make driving more expensive?
What are you doing, Mike? Come on.
Because he refuses to cut that tax?
No. Mike, I clearly said this. It has been an ideological fixation of this Liberal government to make driving more expensive. That's why the federal government has brought in the fuel standards tax. That's why the federal government has brought in the industrial carbon tax. That's why the Liberals had the consumer carbon tax for so long until Conservatives fought so hard to get rid of. So the point I'm making is that it's our job to hold the federal government to account. This is something the federal government can do. Other countries around the world have done this. European countries have suspended their fuel taxes, their gas taxes. Countries all around the world are pursuing this. This is having a major impact on the ability of families to put food on their table, to bring their kids to activities. I represent a riding that has a lot of rural communities where people have to drive 50, 60, 100 kilometers just to get to work. This is absolutely eating away at what's left at the end of the month. Families are falling further and further behind. Governments shouldn't benefit from massive windfalls as fuel prices skyrocket. And what Pierre has put forward today for Canadians is a responsible plan to eliminate wasteful spending so we can provide relief at the pumps. I think that's what Canadians want. That's what we're going to be pushing for in the weeks ahead in Parliament.
You did mention ALTO earlier. I want to bring that back up here. Your party,
the boondoggle,
very much opposed to it. And of course, you're saying that it should be cut altogether. However, your party also didn't use the leverage that it had at the committee stage when part of the changes to the ALTO that were contained in Budget C-15, the budget implementation bill, you didn't use those powers to try and change any of the expropriation issues that were in that bill. So how are you opposing it now if you didn't do anything about it then?
Well, we did oppose it at the report stage. We focused on the budget implementation bill. Our focus was to prevent the government from giving itself what's called Henry VIII powers to avoid accountability and transparency and to exempt themselves from existing pieces of legislation. We used our leverage at committee to put in safeguards around that. When the specific question on ALTO was put before the House of Commons, where every single MP had the ability to vote yay or nay on ALTO, ALTO, Conservatives opposed this $90 billion boondoggle in the House of Commons at the report stage. So we absolutely did both. We fought for accountability and greater safeguards against Liberal corruption and overreach, while at the same time specifically voting against this $90 billion boondoggle.
But in C-15, there were also provisions around expropriation that you could have also tried to amend. You amended other things in C-15, but not that one. I also wanted to ask you, though, when you talk about being against this project because it'll take people's land. And I know that argument has been made by Scott Reed, by Michael Barrett. However, your party doesn't seem to think that taking people's land is a problem when the project in question is a pipeline. Why is there a difference?
Well, there's a massive difference. What we're talking about, first of all, when pipelines are built across this country, I've got pipelines that run through my running. Many of them are in existing corridors. All kinds of expansions and line reversals are done in existing corridors that already exist. There's a robust mechanism in place to ensure safety and as minimal impact to property owners. When we're talking about ALTO, there's a lot of things going on here. First of all, yes, there's absolutely the expropriation part of it, but it's also about severing communities. When you have these high-speed rail lines, you can't have at-grade crossings in the vast number of circumstances. That means rural roads are going to be literally severed in two, and people are going to have to drive potentially, in some cases, even 100 kilometers or more to get just to the other side of the railway tracks. We're talking about servicing one of the best served transportation corridors in the country with profitable private sector transportation solutions in terms of airlines. We're talking about displacing that, massive amounts of government subsidies. This is a project that the government admits they've guessed that it's going to cost about $90 billion, but they've admitted that they don't actually have a budget for that. So there's lots of reasons why we oppose this bill. It's not just one reason. It's an accumulation of factors that we believe this is going to be a massive boondoggle. We believe $90 billion is just the starting point. It's going to be much, much, much more than that. And the government has failed to explain where the ROI will be, how Canadians will be better off. The vast majority of Canadians, overwhelming majority of Canadians, will be paying for this in their taxes, but will never have access to it. Nobody, outside of this corridor is going to have regular access to this type of project. We believe it's much better to not spend the money on this, work towards balancing the budget, provide tax relief for motorists and Canadians, especially during this time of high fuel prices. We believe this is the responsible approach.
But there's an estimate that ALTO could boost Canada's GDP by about $35 billion. So I'm trying to understand, is your opposition to this project rooted in the fact that this train will have stops in cities where the Conservatives don't hold ridings?
No, if you ask someone who wants to build you a $90 billion railway, yeah, they're gonna come up with numbers. But the government itself admits that there's no budget. They haven't come to Parliament with any kind of responsible plan, with any kind of costing on it, with any actual comprehensive look at what the economic activity will provide. You're taking $90 billion out of the economy, and you're talking about perhaps a $30 billion return. In return. That math doesn't work out. The people who are proponents of this, you'll pardon me for not believing Liberals at face value when they justify their massive spending projects. We believe the much more responsible way to do this is to help grow our economy by getting government out of the way. Want to talk about building nation-building projects? Private sector pipeline proponents are willing to do that with their own investment dollars if we could go back to the old Conservative system where you had a regulatory review system that actually allowed projects to get approved. And after 10 years of this government blocking those types of projects, we now live in a country where the government had to use tax dollars to build this energy infrastructure, whereas under the Conservative government, private sector investors did that with their own money, but Canadians benefited from it.
Explain it to Mike like he's 5 years old. Mike isn't too sharp.
In terms of royalties, in terms of jobs. So there's lots of ways that we can build nation-building projects that don't cost taxpayers a cent by just getting government out of the way. And in typical Liberal fashion, they believe the only way to do this kind of stuff is if they throw a whole bucket load of money at the wall and hope some of it trickles down to Canadians. We don't believe that's what hardworking Canadians want to see done with their tax dollars. That's why we're saying, let's put that money into tax relief. That's much better for the economy and for individual Canadians.
But with respect, do you think that the MOU with Alberta is not what you have laid out there in making sure that they are getting things out of the way?
There's nothing in the MOU that repeals liberal anti-development legislation. There's nothing in the MOU that that provides regulatory certainty. What is in the MOU is an increase to the industrial carbon tax. What is in the MOU is forcing a project proponent to partner up with this thing called Pathways, which is a massive
this is something that Premier Smith has agreed to. This is something that Premier Smith has signed on to and agreed to.
But when the government of Canada puts a take it or leave it type of deal that's not optimal, what we're offering the people of Alberta is the ability to get a pipeline built without a higher industrial carbon tax. What we're offering the people of Alberta is a federal government, a conservative government that is the champion of our natural resource sector, that looks for ways to get to yes. We're talking about repealing liberal legislation that you wouldn't need an MOU. The private sector would do what it did for decades in this country. We're offering the people of Alberta a real chance to get our natural resources to Tidewater, to the Pacific Ocean. There was a pipeline on the books called Northern Gateway. It didn't need an MOU. It didn't need a federal government forcing an increase in the industrial carbon tax. And Mark Carney advised and cheered on Justin Trudeau when he canceled that. So, I understand why, when you've got a federal government that basically says to the province, this is the only way to get something built, that's not optimal. That shouldn't be the measure of success in this country. And I absolutely do believe that Alberta and Saskatchewan and all of Canada would be much better served by a conservative government that simply worked with the industry to get to a yes, rather than impose all kinds of hurdles and hoops and higher taxes, because at the end of the day, Liberals don't actually believe in developing this. They are ideologically opposed to developing our oil and gas sector. Mark Carney wrote a book called Values, where he described himself.
It's a terrible read, guys. It's trash. Values, I read it like more than once.
As a human being. And he talked about leaving our oil and gas in the ground. He advocated for leaving, in his words, up to 50% of our natural resources in the ground. He complained that the carbon tax wasn't high enough, and he said that his answer was to have a shadow carbon tax. So Mark Carney and the Liberal government just simply do not believe in this. Canadians would be much better served with a conservative government that champion our natural resource sector.
Okay, Mr. Scheer, we're all out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, Andrew Scheer is one of our favorites. Michael Couture went down a couple of points in that one. Aaron Canadian Loney, we're going to wrap it up there. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think of Andrew Scheer. What is going on with the legacy media? What a hack job. Anyhow, we'll wrap it up. That's it. Catch you in the next video.